Shat Karmas, which are yogic cleansing techniques, and often not so many people know much about them, or they seem quite crazy and intense in why you do them. So I'm going to kind of structure most of my talk around swallowing cloth, like the Dasti, which I'll demonstrate later on. But we'll kind of use that to describe all the different Shat Karmas and why you do them. So I'll start off with a bit of an introduction. So I'm Nick, or I was given the name Yogi Sadashi from my teacher in India. And I've been practicing for about 12 years, and I started off my yogic journey practicing Ashtanga, and I was all about, opening your body and lengthening muscles and getting stronger and all this kind of things. And so I practiced that, and I went to Mysore in India, practiced with Sri K. Pattabhi Jois, the guru of Ashtanga, and then I just kind of kept practicing. And then after a while, I got into fasting. Like, I don't know if anyone's here done much fasting, but I got into fasting and going up to 40 days without food and kind of really cleansing and purging the body of all its toxins and having like amazing results, like obviously like emotionally and spiritually and energetically opening up, but as well as kind of the body is kind of mostly what I'm going to talk about today. Is so I had amazing results in like my body getting so more flexible than it's ever been flexible before, and this kind of really started to kind of get me thinking. And I was thinking, it makes sense why you're going to be really flexible and open on once you kind of cleanse the organs and clean the body. But I kind of really tried to just piece it all together. So at the same time, I was getting treatments from a friend who does visceral osteopathy. So I don't know if people are familiar with osteopathy, but it's kind of like a manual, a manipulative medicine where you kind of, most people know it through manipulation of the spine, but they actually do manipulation of the organs. And this is really interesting because like once I kind of found out a bit of this knowledge that all the organs move in the body as well. It's we think in yoga, we do this pose, we stretch this, and it's this muscle restricting ourselves from getting into this posture, whereas it may not necessarily be the case. And this really opens my mind up to the fact that it could be an organ restricting us to do a certain posture or to open up our body or that's creating an injury. So in visceral osteopathy, it's actually, there's a main kind of guy that kind of really kind of pioneered it, and from France, called Jean-Pierre Barral. And so he kind of talks about, like the liver moves 1 kilometer each day, and the kidneys move 800 meters each day. So this is extremely fascinating because obviously if these organs get stuck and they don't move, then the rest of the body and the rest of the superficial muscles have to compensate by making up for this lack of movement, say in the liver or the stomach or whatever organ it is. So it's a really kind of different approach thinking about it, of like why we would kind of cleanse the organs. And so, just so I don't get lost. But yeah, so then then it also kind of got me thinking, then why are they restricted as well? Why are these organs restricted? And these organs can be restricted obviously from being toxic, and then the liver, it really cops a lot of stress these days in our way of society. So it gets stagnant, and then it gets fibrotic, and then it really doesn't move much at all. And then and then like I said, the whole body kind of compensates for this lack of movement. So and another thing is also kind of lack of consciousness of our minds. So like in the external forms of yoga, if we kind of, like when we first start yoga, the teacher says, like bring the arch of the feet, stretch the feet and stretch the legs and do all this, and our mind's just going nuts because we can't quite kind of come into this part of the body, like our mind's really trying to connect and really trying to let go, or really trying to strengthen this part. And over time we gain more and more consciousness in this part of the body. So in the same way, Shat Karmas, or working with the organs, is about actually our minds kind of revisiting the organs so we can kind of again restore full function and movement. So, and another, coming from another angle, so it's really interesting kind of incorporating what I just said. And if we look at, there's a famous text that you guys might be familiar with, which is the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. Have people heard of that? But it's kind of like the Bible of Hatha Yoga. And quite interestingly, in that it says do Shat Karma or do yogic cleanses before you start the yogic asana practice. So do the cleanses before we start the postures. So this is like incorporating into just what I said. It completely makes sense, because if all your body's full functioning, your organs are functioning, everything's moving, when you come to asana, it's just easy, you know, you just flop into these forward bends or so on and so forth. So it's really interesting looking into the text. So I am studying osteopathy, which is like what I mentioned, it's like a manual medicine, but also within osteopathy there's a strong kind of neuroscience component. So we're always looking at all the cycles of the neural loops and, you know, the pain and contract cycles from the spine. And so in osteopathy we're obviously trying to break that cycle, and there's all these concepts like this, but I'll keep coming back to them as the talk progresses. And as I'll keep talking for a little bit, and so if you stay with me, and then I'll do the demonstration. I'll show you the swallowing and the vascularity, and then we'll do questions at the end of that. So maybe just say, if you want to ask a question along the way, just shoot your hand up, otherwise we can just save them till the end. So, alright, so like I said, we'll use vascularity as the main kind of example. So in this vascularity, the cloth swallowing, I swallow up to 7 meters of cloth, and so I eat a lot of cloth, and it all comes down to the stomach. And so I'm not sure if people have heard of this before. So in this technique, like there's a lot of different levels. Like, so we're going to start off with a physical level, that this cleanse actually obviously scrubs the inside of your esophagus, it scrubs the inside of your stomach, and then we do Nauli over the top, so it actually sponges and kind of mops up all excess stomach acid. And so these are like the really obvious kind of physical parts of the cleansing technique, which I'll show you, as well as I've got a few kind of, because obviously there's no kind of scientific research done on swallowing cloth, so it's all of it's just hypothetical kind of theories that I've made up myself. So when I do this practice, and the days that I'll do it, and I'll swallow the cloth and churn it up in my stomach and pull it back out, and then eventually I'll go on and I'll eat food in that day. And during that day, when I eat the food, I just feel so kind of pumped full of energy. It's almost like my absorption from doing this cleansing technique just goes through the roof. And so I've got a few theories on why this might be the case, and maybe like there's cells inside the stomach called the parietal cells, which actually secrete things like intrinsic factor, which binds with B12, you all know B12, and so it can also really help maybe the absorption of B12, again this is hypothetical, and as well as increasing the flow of stomach acid. So these are my theories about how it works physically on that level. So obviously that's a pretty major kind of effects that it has on your stomach. We very rarely would scrub the insides of our stomach like this in normal day-to-day life. So you actually feel amazing just in your stomach and esophagus. So that's kind of like the main kind of obvious techniques that people would think about. And the really exciting kind of effects that I've kind of come up with over the years of practicing this technique, and as well as combining it with neuroscience from osteopathy, is there's the whole kind of neurological involvement. So when we swallow the cloth, obviously your first response would be to gag, you know. And when I was first learning this technique, my teacher goes, okay, well, I'll come and show you one morning. And so I'll come down, and I was thinking I was pretty kind of gung-ho, and yeah, it won't be too hard to kind of get it, and you know, it'll take me a few goes or whatever. And so he goes, okay, here it is, and goes, go, 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 go. And then just now he swirls around and pulls it out, and it's like, oh yeah, it's simple kind of thing. And so then I've got my cloth, and he's like, okay, I'll teach you how to kind of fold it, because you've got to fold the first little bit and put it at the back of the throat, and then you take your first gulp, and then you're like almost, you're just gagging, and then you know, take a few more swallows trying to get it down, and your whole body's going into convulsions, and you know, you've got snot coming out of your nose, and your eyes are crying, and you know, there's an obvious real autonomic gag reflex happening, which actually the nerve that controls this is called the glossopharyngeal nerve, which is obviously an autonomic nerve that, you know, that's why we stick our fingers in the back of the throat and we want to puke. So really interestingly, so what I've thought about is, over time and practice, I start to do this practice more and more, you get more and more comfortable turning off this gag reflex. So I don't know if people have read, there's a really popular book called like The Brain That Changes Itself or Heals Itself, and it's about the neuroplasticity of the brain, and you're starting new neural cycles. And so with the glossopharyngeal nerve, potentially you're starting new neural loops that you're changing it from the autonomic nervous system into an actually controlled and conscious nervous system. So this is, I think, absolutely fascinating because, so then that's one nerve, and then the second nerve that's involved is called the vagus nerve. People may have heard of this. Another real kind of strong parasympathetic nerve, so it's all about rest and digest, and this nerve serves the whole of the body for all the organs that when they relax, like our body goes into a parasympathetic state, our body will relax, will digest food, will absorb nutrients, and you see most of today's life, we're very sympathetic, which is the opposite. We're go, drink coffee, we're running around, and during those times the blood flow is restricted from all the vital organs, and if we stay in this state for long enough, we can actually do ourselves harm to the organs. So that's why it's really exciting, this vagus nerve, which is the main parasympathetic nerve that goes to all our organs. And interestingly, this nerve actually circles around the esophagus. So it comes from the brainstem in the lower brain.